Well, hello, everybody. Hello, good afternoon. Nice to see you all. How wonderful it is to be with all of you here in Halifax, which is located on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. My name is Andy Fillmore, and I have the great privilege of being the Member of Parliament for this beautiful place, Halifax, and I welcome you warmly to be here. And I know that there are many Haligonians and Nova Scotians in the room sitting perhaps at your table that will welcome you as well. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces and so many new faces as well. Now, if you're joining us from afar, let me welcome you to Canada's Ocean City. And if you've noticed, the license plates on all of the vehicles across the bottom, it says Canada's Ocean Playground. But more and more, Halifax is becoming Canada's Ocean Workshop, and it's largely to do with the work that our Nova Scotian colleagues in this room are doing. Now, I'll be back with the conference tomorrow to speak, but in preparation for that and in preparation for today, I took a look at some of the key topics you'll be discussing at this conference, and they include climate change, innovation in the blue economy, innovation in shipping, and I have to say that you've come to exactly the right place here in Halifax. As a coastal city, sadly at times, we know all too well that the threat of climate change is significant and what that means to our coastal communities. In fact, you come to our province less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Fiona ravaged homes and disrupted the lives of hundreds of thousands of Atlantic Canadians, thousands of whom are still without power today. And while I'm on this point, I want to thank everyone who's been hard at work helping our region get back on its feet, including members of the Canadian Armed Forces and power crews, emergency responders, and importantly, everyday Atlantic Canadians who have held out an olive branch or an extension cord or a basket of food to their neighbor so that we can all get through this together. Now, thank you. Here in Halifax, our storied history has taught us just how complex our relationship with the ocean can be. And we know that while the ocean holds remarkable, untold almost opportunities for innovation, for scientific discovery, as well as significant economic potential that has sustained our coastal communities for unknowable hundreds of years, the ocean also poses one of the greatest risks to our region, with sea level rise and extreme weather events putting us on the front lines of the climate crisis. That's exactly why in everything we do to harness the vast power of our ocean, sustainability and conservation must be top of mind through advances in innovation and breakthroughs in ocean tech by those of you here today. We can do right by the ocean so that the ocean can do right by us. And that is the topic of our keynote panel today on the future of ocean conservation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists, starting with Louie Porta, Executive Director of Oceans North. Come on up, Louie. Kendra MacDonald. There's Louie. Kendra MacDonald is the Chief Executive Officer of Canada's Ocean Supercluster. Kendra, nice to see you. McElvoy is the Senior Editor at The Economist and one of your hosts for this wonderful conference. And finally, someone who in the last 10 days has been on the ground in our region, taking an active role in supporting our recovery from Hurricane Fiona, including with his announcement today of $300 million in emergency relief fund. It's my great honor to introduce the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honorable Justin Trudeau.
Welcome to you all. And gosh, the room's filled up since this morning. Was it something I said? We're thrilled to be continuing the afternoon with the Prime Minister present and another illustrious panel to add perspective, and we hope keep the Prime Minister on his toes politely as well on oceans and where we want to go from here. And I'm going to start, if I could, Prime Minister, by addressing, and one of the reasons that you've been on the ground in this part of the country such a lot in the recent days is the devastation that's happened in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. What does the road to rebuilding look like for you, having seen what you've seen, and what's stuck with you from your experience?
Well, Atlantic Canada is no stranger to weather. Atlantic Canadians have become extraordinarily resilient created strong communities, being there for each other. What we saw early last week, what we saw through the weekend after Fiona hit was neighbors helping neighbors, people stepping up, people, picking up the pieces of broken homes and of devastated communities. But a sense of, commitment to being there for each other that really, really shone through. And that's always great to see. But there was also a level of anxiety, anxiety about how they were going to cover the damages. Obviously, I met a family in Cape Breton, Sean and Amy, who had the roof of a house from 2 blocks away lift up, cross over, and slam into the side of their house and actually knock it off kilter. And it's like, they didn't know whether they're insured for it, and how do you insure against roof damage from a different house? The impact of these things is huge. And the one thing I said is, we will be there for you. We will be there to help people rebuild, people get their lives back. Brenda, who'd lost her antique shop, had drifted right across the road, still protected the China figurines inside, but all the Beatles records were gone. People are adjusting and are resilient, but that's why municipalities, the province, the federal government, we just announced $300 million this morning, and that's in addition to the disaster relief program that we're going to be sending to the provinces over the coming months and years. But and Canadians were really generous too, giving to the Red Cross, because that's what we do. But there is a real question about, okay, as we build back better with a little more resilience, should we be building back in the same places? Should we be building back the same ways? And those are really hard questions to answer, because the fact is the intensity of the extreme weather events is going to increase over the coming years. So those are conversations that people are going to be having, not right now, but over the coming weeks and months. But the one thing I can guarantee is the federal government, provincial governments, and communities will be there for people to make sure that Atlantic Canada and the extraordinary resilient communities continue to thrive long into the future.
And of course, this isn't by any means the only extreme weather event that you've seen in Canada recently. There was flooding in British Columbia with $2 billion of damage there in 2021. If I were to say to you, of course, all countries are exposed coastally. I'm part of the UK, my little house in Kent at the weekends, is very much on the front line. I think all of us have just become aware that there is more risk and we need greater adaptability. But if I just say, well, you've been interested in climate change for a very long time. In fact, you're one of the biggest advocates among the developed countries, and you've been in power, turns out, nearly 7 years? Should you have seen more of this coming?
Well, we did. We have seen it coming for a while. I mean, it was in my very first years as a politician that I got to visit the devastation of Fort McMurray, where wildfires, took out a significant part of that community. We've seen record-breaking floods in Manitoba. We've seen the flooding in British Columbia. We've seen heat waves and forest fires in British Columbia. We lost the town of Lytton in BC at record high temperatures. And yes, we're seeing more extreme weathers. I mean, I remember one of the things a mayor, I think she was in Saskatchewan, told me at one point, she's like, look, we can handle a 100-year flood. We just can't handle it every 5 years. And it's the pace of and the intensity of these things that are coming that means, yes, we have gotten very good. I was meeting with the premier just earlier, and I said, look, we've been through a lot of these so far. Unfortunately, we're getting very good. The federal government will be there to backstop all the aid that you're sending out to Nova Scotians, because Nova Scotians alone or Atlantic provinces alone cannot have to cover all this. That's why we have a big country that is there to support each other. So there's that. But there's also an understanding that we do need to continue to step up in the fight against climate change. We do need to, and we put forward a pan-Canadian price on pollution in our very first mandate, and then had 2 elections that rested largely on that debate. and Canadians consistently continue to support political parties that say, no, we need real action on climate. And that has gotten a little more challenging right now because, of course, cost of living is going up, and it's easy to sort of point out the extra costs in the moment of fighting climate change. But I think Atlantic Canadians and people right across the country know that the context we're in means we're going to have to accelerate. And one of the exciting things, even as we're talking about, the challenge around the oil crisis, the challenge around Russia's invasion of Ukraine that has driven up energy prices and caused Europe to try and look desperately for other sources for their energies, is there is an appetite to accelerate that transition away from a reliance on fossil fuels. So it's, for 7 years, Canadians have heard me saying, yes, climate change is a massive challenge we have to face, but it can also be an opportunity for good jobs, for innovation, for new business models, for new industries that are going to be hugely important in the coming years. And what we've seen just in the past months when the German Chancellor came to Stephenville, Newfoundland, and basically we have German companies buying up all the hydrogen that we can produce in Canada from wind energy and more, and creating more and more projects. This is an opportunity for us to say, look, this is the opportunity. These are where the energy jobs are going to come from in the future. This is the opportunity for Canada to be the supplier of energy in a net zero world. And that's the conversation we're having now that we've been building towards for 7 years, but that is becoming more and more pointed as a conversation now.
Just before I open up to Louie and Kendra, you mentioned the fact that communities that are affected or at risk of being affected may also have to adapt differently. Just give us a flavor of what you think that might look like. What more does need to be done to help those parts of the country prepare for severe weather events? Because I guess if I were possibly looking at your finances, I might be rather worried that you would end up simply having to put forward these generous packages. They're not in the budget, but they have to be there. But you obviously need, from your time, and even if there is a time beyond Justin Trudeau being Prime Minister, you need something that feels, I got to look there. You need something that feels more resilient. Just give us a sense of the way that you're thinking, and then we might get ideas from the rest.
Well, one of the things that we can remark upon, as for all the intensity and violence of Fiona, our large infrastructures actually did pretty well, whether it's the highways or the ferry links, or the ability to get things rolling. I mean, power is another question, and obviously there are still people, more than a week later, without power, including, just a short drive away from here. So there's a lot we need to do around changing and improving the resilience. But we have good infrastructure, and we have done well, and we continue to adapt on it. We're coming forward in the coming months with the National Adaptation Strategy to recognize that this is the new norm. But at the same time, as you are concerned about Canada's finances, and it's thoughtful of you, I can point from the out.
UK, so I have some experience.
Well, I can point out that Canada came into the pandemic with one of the best balance sheets in the G7, and we continue to have one of the best balance sheets in the G7. And our decision, for example, to invest in Canadians with historic supports for small businesses, for individual Canadians through this pandemic, has actually directly led to us bouncing back quicker than many other countries, yet recovering jobs 6 to 9 months before the US did, doing very, very well. And I know that as we invest in more resilient communities and infrastructure, Atlantic Canadians are going to continue to thrive and prosper and create prosperity for all Canadians long into the future as well.
We may have an opening for you advising on the next UK budget. But Louie and Kendra, from what you've just heard there from Justin Trudeau, what are your opening sort of thoughts on that, and also particularly how it might affect the work of engagement, conservation and innovation you're both involved with? I'm just looking at Louie, so I'll bring you straight in if I could.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important that we first realize that our ocean is one of our best climate mitigators and protectors. So having a well intact ocean that's healthy and intact coastal ecosystems is critical to having the resilience that we need when we need it the most, so that when storms happen, and they will continue to happen, we have done everything we can, both that's within our power, and we've harnessed the power of nature to achieve those outcomes. I also think practically, just Nova Scotia is a good example. In 2019, we passed a Coastal Restoration Act or Protection Act rather. And right now we're working on regulations that talk about how we should build, where we should build, to give on the ground people a better sense of resilience and to give the kind of advice and perspective the Prime Minister was just speaking to. And I guess lastly, I would just say that it's important to harness the fact that when crisis strikes, we bring the best out in each other. But we're living in a crisis and we don't bring that energy every day. And so understanding the spirit that brings us together to have what it takes now and bringing it forward tomorrow, I think is really critical as we go forward.
Kendra, would you like to add a word?
Yeah, so I think, all day long, we've heard different challenges that we're facing and the need for innovation to be able to tackle those challenges. So, when I think about innovation, obviously from a supercluster perspective, we do a lot of investment in technological innovation. And so there is certainly room for technology, but it's also about business model innovation. So how do we work together? And Christy Walton talked about, the need for investment and the need for collaboration and how we come together differently in terms of our business models. And we just heard it's around community innovation. And so our premier, so I'm based in St. John's, Newfoundland, and our premier talked about the fact that we lost houses and we can't rebuild those houses in those same places. And we've spent hundreds of years living on the ocean and we might not be able to live that way. So how do we innovate in terms of our communities, in terms of our conversations? And how do we innovate in terms of even the definition of conservation? So there was a scientist a few weeks ago and he's in the room, so hopefully I won't misquote him when I say this. But we can't in some cases restore to what was. So what is that new definition of conservation? And so when I think about, adaptation, that is another place where we need to bring innovation. It's innovation in materials, it's innovation in terms of the data that we're collecting, how we're using that data, the predictions that we're able to make based on that data. So there's just an incredible amount of innovation. And we are, as Canadians, we are innovative people. We rally around the challenges that we face and we find, new ways to tackle challenges. And so I'm really excited with some of the innovations that are to come.
Yeah, Prime Minister, there is opportunity here, isn't there, out of this hardship and for Canada, and also because your climate change leadership is perhaps the part people know less about, I would maybe warrant in the outside world, is the innovation and adaptation around oceans. I'm just interested in how much of a personal interest you've taken.
Well, oceans is the thing that everyone can agree on. A few years ago, we hosted the G7 in Charlevoix, Quebec, and the president of the United States at the time wasn't a big fan of the Paris Agreement. So we wanted to figure out how to pull together something strong around climate because it was so important to Canadians and so important to get the G7 leaning in on that, but that Donald Trump would actually agree to. And what we found, what we did was actually on protecting the oceans, ocean charter, the protecting ocean plastics, protecting from ocean plastics, banning single-use plastics. All that was something that, even someone who didn't want to engage on Paris targets and climate change said, okay, yes, we can absolutely do things to protect the oceans. And that's somewhere, we then went on to co-host with Kenya and Japan, the Blue Economy Summit. And there is an understanding of the tragedy of the commons as applied to the oceans now that I think everyone is getting more, and the need for innovation and technology. I mean, we're using AI now to help locate illegal fishing in Canadian boundary waters. There is an understanding of the preciousness of the ocean as a resource for so many vulnerable countries around the world, that having Canada step up and lead, not just on saying, okay, you have to protect, although we're doing that. When I took office in 2015, we 1% of our oceans protected, and now we're up over 14%, and we're well on our way to the 30 by 30. And that's really important, not just for the sake of biodiversity, but for fighting climate change as well. But it's also important that one of the biggest countries in the world with the longest coastline in the world be stepping up on that, because often when you talk about protecting, it's small countries that are saying, okay, we're going to protect 30%, and that's great, and it's hard for them. But in terms of affecting the ecosystems around the planet, we got to do a better job of getting those top 10 countries in landmass and coastal size to actually be moving forward on this. And Canada can do that, but technology and innovation and creating a strong business case for it and a business model for it and creating solutions like all of you are creating that can then be exported, not just across the country, but around the world. That's a niche that Canadians have naturally fit into that I think there is such a need for and such opportunity for us that I'm so excited to be here right now.
Let's talk about this in a bit granular detail and also from the communities effectively, if I could come back to you. Arctic communities are experiencing climate change impacts at an accelerated rate. Tell us a bit about how you would envisage leveraging Indigenous and Western knowledge together, because none of this, I would guess, is going to work simply by people, however well motivated, well informed, and in the sort of leadership role that the Prime Minister is referring to in the world economy, if you don't have the support and use the knowledge on the ground. So I'd be really interested to hear some insights on that.
Sure, it's a great question. And first, I would just say, as a non-Indigenous person, it's clear that there's two things that are true at the same time. We have a complete consensus between Indigenous knowledge and Western science. They're telling us to do the same things. They're coming at it from different perspectives, but their goal and what they're showing us is a unified solution, or is a unified problem. The question we have to ask ourselves is, why is that information not enough to do what we need to do? And for me, I think it centers on the fact that, the nature, the world's a coastal place. Canada is a deeply coastal place, but we need to attach our solutions and our strategies to the values and the lived realities of people where they are, so that they can engage in ways that are authentic to them, matter to them, are part of their history, but also are part of the change that we're seeking as we go forward. And I don't think these things should be leveraged. I think they just need to be unified. And then for the rest of us who are trying to solve things, we need to ask that last question of what have we not been able to do, and how do we do it better?
Kendra, would you like to add anything on that?
Yes, I mean, I think in the same way that Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge are aligned, I think that when we talk about a healthy ocean and a productive ocean is a healthy ocean. So the health and wealth objectives of our ocean are aligned. And so the economic opportunity and the conservation objectives, I'm not going to say they're always perfectly aligned in terms of how those conversations go, but overall, those objectives are aligned. And so, with the Ocean Supercluster recently, we've been traveling across the country, quite challenged with some major events over the last few weeks. But having the conversation around what is our ocean economic ambition for Canada? And we said, we could be 5 times bigger than we are today in a decade. And that would be, over $200 billion, a lot of that being driven by big opportunities like energy. And so then the follow-on questions become, well, how do you do that with big conservation objectives? And I think they're perfectly aligned. There's a tremendous economic opportunity. We heard this room can develop major solutions to problems facing the entire globe, and that creates tremendous opportunity for Canada.
There is something to be learned, isn't there, from conservation and environmental movements in the past when it comes to making sure that when you move, that you're able to bring various communities and various voices in the public with you. And if I were to say to you, Prime Minister, what do you find the hardest bit of it? It does seem almost, as you said, in the international context, there's the one, hey, you and Donald Trump were getting on well about it. So it was obviously, there was that bit was, I'm not going to say easy, but it was happening. But when it comes down to people's lived experience, their lives, their heritage, it can feel different, can't it?
Yeah, and I think, people have a sense of the fact that, climate change is real and we're seeing the impacts of it around the world. But it's a crisis layered on top of all sorts of other crises they're facing. Whether it's the pandemic we just came through, whether it's the cost of living crisis people are facing right now, whether it's uncertainty of where their community's going, where their jobs are going, whether you're a fisher or an oil worker or what have you, there's a sense of a tremendous level of disruption going on around us in the world right now. Even the geopolitics have changed irremediably as of February 24th, where the rules-based order that establish a level of peace and prosperity and stability for over 70 years has now been upended. That's a lot to worry about. And to tell people that, okay, because of climate change, everything's, you have to put everything else aside and focus on this. Well, people just won't buy in. And we're seeing a rise in populism everywhere around the world of people who are saying, easy solutions. I'll put more money in your pockets, and you don't have to worry about your neighbors. You don't have to worry about people on the other side of the country or the other side of the earth. I'm just going to make sure I'm looking out for you. That's very compelling. But of course, it's wrong. I mean, the pandemic showed us just how interconnected everyone and everything is. Climate change is showing us how interconnected everything and everyone is. The idea of hunkering down and waiting for the storm to blow us over, it's not going to happen. If there's any place in the world that understands that, it's here in Atlantic Canada, where you need to check on your neighbor. You need to be there to support. You need to create those strong, resilient communities. And that is the path. But that's a harder thing to sell when people are scared and anxious and mentally knocked around by the past few years. And that's where getting to that tangible hope, getting to the saying, okay, you know what? We've got this. We have the technology, we have the innovation, we have the instincts of being there for each other. Canadians know how to get through a storm. We know how to get through long winter nights. We know how to get between communities that are too spaced out. Like we're built for this. And we can be the purveyors of those solutions because we're thoughtful and creative, a little too earnest for our own good sometimes, but we're there for each other. Right? And that's what the world needs right now. As you look at the instability you're seeing everywhere around the world, the idea that people can be willing to come together and say, you know what, we got this. We're going to figure this out. We're going to be the purveyor of the democratic, environmentally responsible, human rights protecting, labor responsible purveyor of energy solutions in a net zero world. Through hydrogen, through wind, through solar, through all the geothermal, through nuclear, all those different range of things. Like the opportunities for Canada are extraordinary, but we got to get to a place where people can see that, can see through the angst right now of not being able to fill up your gas tank and worried that, okay, climate change means it's going to get more expensive to fill up our gas tank. Are you kidding me? That's an easy thing to respond, which is why, by the way, our price on pollution returns more money to the average families than it actually costs them. But that conversation about how we prepare for your kids' future while making sure you can feed your kids and give them the quality of life they need right now has to be at the center of everything we do as a country, as a community, and as politicians.
My guess is there'll be some. Thank you very much, Ed. I think it was warming to your theme there. I think there are bound to be some questions coming from the audience along the lines that you've described. I just want to give my panel a last thought before we go to the floor. Let's public-private partnership, obviously crucial to this. If either of you would like to address that, but just really, is there anything you feel we haven't addressed that we ought to sort of take into our Q&A? I'll go the other way, Ken.
Okay.
Sorry to caught you by surprise.
It's all good. So the Ocean Supercluster is a private-public partnership, and we're pretty excited about that. And I think that, we set out to change the way that we do ocean business in Canada and to make it more sustainable and more digital and more inclusive. And we are doing that, and we are doing that by working together, and we're doing that by working together differently. And it will take all of us, and it will take all of us coming together and bringing all of those different perspectives. And that is the strength of public-private partnerships.
Sure, thank you. And I think it's also an opportunity to show the power of making new solutions between conservation and what communities need. You know, a number of years ago, the Prime Minister announced our largest national marine conservation area in the Arctic, Tuamanga, and it came with a record investment into infrastructure that people have wanted for a long time. Historically, you don't necessarily get a new wharf or a community center or guardian programs when you protect someplace, but you would often get those if a mine showed up or there was forestry. And there is not an inherent connection between those things. There's an assumed one. So what we've seen is a government that has prioritization around nature and climate can create new paths to help people have a healthy future and healthy communities.
Right, we've got a generous 10 minutes of questions. Is that all right, Prime Minister? Thank you. I don't want to interfere with the running of your great country, but it's great to have this opportunity. So who would like to start us off with questions? I think there are roving mics. Let's take a couple if we can. I'm so sorry, I've got very bad visibility from up here on who is asking questions. So do we have someone over here? Yes. I'm so sorry, I'm really finding it difficult to see you. That's also my long side, but there's a hand here and there's one over here. So just get a mic to someone and we'll take our chance. We'll roll the dice. What can go wrong? Hi.
Hi, my name is Jason Heyman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Sustainable Marine. We have a tidal energy device, which is installed down in Grand Passage and is the first marine energy device to be connected to the grid in Canada. And my question is, how is the Canadian government going to balance, I suppose, the development of the offshore renewable energy sector with ocean conservation, and how can a pathway that's going to provide investors with confidence be provided?
That's quite specific, so it sounds like you could just take that one. I don't know the answer to that one. Who's going to do it?
The fact is, we don't know yet what the exact range or mix of energy solutions the world is going to use 30 years from now, 50 years from now. You know, what role will tidal energy play? What role will small modular reactors play? What role will be solar? How much geothermal? How much wind? How much LNG with sequestration put into hydrogen? But we know we're going to need to figure out the very best solutions in all that. And that's why the focus that we've had as a government has been around encouraging innovation and investment in all those areas, hand in hand with conservation. We don't want to be, pushing solutions that are going to create more problems in the long term than we have. But we also need people to be innovative, which is why I'm a fan of nuclear. And I know environmentalists haven't always been comfortable with nuclear, but I think we need to look at it as one of the paths and one of the part of the solutions that we need to look at. How much it'll be, or whether it'll dead end, or whether it'll solve everything, that still remains to be seen. But a responsible country cannot sort of pick right now what things are going to be needed in 50 years. And that's where the kind of innovation here in this room, through the supercluster, through others, the kinds of incentives we can create, even the price on pollution we put in, where companies know it's going to be more and more expensive for them to keep doing things the regular way, is incentives to upgrade their equipment, to look for new technological solutions so that they can avoid that increasing price on pollution. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to build into the system to make sure that if you got the best product, you're going to be incredibly successful with it. But if some guy down the road figures out a different way to do it that is more effective, they have a shot as well. And that creation of an ecosystem where we're busy generating solutions that, quite frankly, aren't just there for Canada, but for the entire world, is going to be key. I mean, one of the reasons why, someone said to me, look, why is Europe coming to get hydrogen from offshore wind in Newfoundland? You've got, Europe's got lots of windmills, lots of power generation. Why don't they just create the hydrogen there? Because every little bit of electricity they're generating from renewables goes straight into their grid, and they desperately need it. We have excess space, we certainly have excess wind, and we have an ability to harness and create energy solutions that the world is going to need. And that's what's exciting. And that's why we're going to continue supporting the kind of innovation that you're putting forward. So thank you for that.
Going to take a question from over here. Hello.
Forrest Worm of Dalhousie University and the Ocean Frontier Institute. Prime Minister, I was quite buoyed by what you said about Canada being an ocean nation and taking more leadership in that realm. I'm thinking a lot about kids these days, and I know you're an educator and a teacher as well. And how do we bring them into this conversation? I'm noticing that there's very few truly young people in this audience and many audiences I attend talking about the ocean and the environment and climate and Canada's leadership. How can we bring them into the conversation? How can we do more to enable them to use that opportunity and see it early on in their lives?
Well, from having lots of friends who grew up here in Atlantic Canada, I can tell you that the awareness and understanding of oceans, even as little kids, is deeply ingrained. And we need to continue to empower and encourage that. But the one thing that worries me the most, and not just as a teacher, but as a parent, is the fact that kids are looking at a world that is a little bit shambolic these days. And the idea that they're going to grow up and inherit this mess is somewhat demoralizing for an awful lot of young people. And I think we need to really do a deliberate job of not just modeling the kinds of actions that should reassure them about what their future is going to look like, but spend more time empowering them and listening to them. I mean, the one thing that is, it's always been hugely motivating for me as a way of getting young people into politics, for example, and it's not because young people vote, because they do, but sometimes it's harder to get them to vote than seniors, for example. But the thing about young people is that they are automatic long-term thinkers. Once you're in your 30s or 40s and you got the mortgage and you're starting to have orthodontic bills for your kids, and you think of the future as sort of linear, that if you set aside 8% of your paycheck every month, you'll be able to retire at this level to this level. And there's an expectation the world's sort of going to gradually change in a linear way. Young people are ready for leaps. They can imagine a totally different future because their life is all about changing from elementary school to high school to university, to living with your family, to living on your own, to starting your own family. Massive transformations that would be and are extremely disorienting for someone who's set in their ways and, like me, entering their 50s. But young people are willing and able to challenge the orthodoxies and push you on saying, well, why can't you do this? Well, it's never been done this way. Well, why not try now? And there is a need to empower and involve young people in the way they are dreaming about the future in a positive way that we cannot afford to miss. So I really thank you for bringing up that question, and know that I am hugely passionate about
It's a
getting
great
young people there.
perspective, isn't it? Thank you very much for that one. I thought what I might do is take a question from this end of the room, and now I've got used to the lighting, and maybe something from the other side as well. So you've got a chance, and do feel free to chip in, rest of the panelists as well. Now, come on over. This be very quiet over here. This is obviously the silence zone. If anyone got the one, I'll take the one right here then. Never take pass off an easy one. Do feel free to come on in if you're in over this end. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister, for being here today. It's really proud to have you here as leader of our country. One of the issues I've been dealing with for 18 years, and I feel that I'm alone on this, is sea-dump chemical and conventional munitions. I have a charity in Cape Breton. It's pretty well world renowned. We have 3 long-term chemical weapons programs in Europe and with NATO. We have more than 1,000 sites offshore Nova Scotia. I've done the risk assessment for the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, and we found that the munitions are directly impacting on the health of the codfish, on their inability to reproduce, and so on. So I made a commitment to the United Nations called UN Ocean 21356, to set up a science and technology center in Cape Breton to eradicate diminutions around the world globally. I've been experienced all kinds of problems trying to do this UN ocean action. I've been getting sort of support from the government and then kind of non-support. And so my question is to you today, is there somewhere that I can go to government to ask for support to have this UN action reviewed to see if it's positive for Canada and the Canadian economy and the resources that it should be implemented?
Can I think we got the sense of that, so if that's all right, can I just hold for 1 second and maybe take in another question? It's obviously a rather serious matter. We want to get your dance and someone over there at the back. Yeah. Oh, and a young woman, be wonderful to have a female voice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, took words out of my mouth. Thank you. We take that and then there's a gentleman over here as well. But let's take these two. Hi, hello there.
Hi, my name is Ronnie Noonan Birch. I think I'm one of those young people that Professor Boris was talking about, or early career ocean professional is what we call it in the field. And I'd love to hear from each of the panelists about what this blue future looks like to each of you, what the blue economy means to you.
Actually, why don't, could I ask maybe the other panelists to lead off on that and then we'll finish with Prime Minister on that, right?
Sure, it's a good question. And I think there's kind of two parts to my answer. One, our blue economy, for it to truly be blue, has to be underpinned fully and completely by our climate and nature imperatives, full stop. Second of all, in the context of Atlantic Canada, we have to understand that the heart of our blue economy is wild caught fish. And so we must manage our fisheries well, because that's the life and sort of the identity of so much of this region. And so as we go forward beyond that, we need to understand those two principles, both at a policy scale and at sort of an on the ground day-to-day life scale.
Yeah, so I think I could give a very long answer to this, but the blue economy for me, and one of the reasons that I get so excited about this role is really being able to build solutions for a healthier planet and a future where we do have a much healthier ocean and a much greater awareness across, not only for all Canadians, but for the entire planet, of the role that the ocean plays and how dependent we actually are on the ocean for life. And so, you know, I think that in a place where we've got, you know, an inclusive ocean economy, so we're all part of the conversation, and that we're really thinking about the health of the planet in the decisions that we're making and the solutions that we're building and the conversations that we're having, and we're doing it together as one big community. So, you know, I think that there's lots of things that I have seen that would suggest that we can do that, and I hope that we continue on that journey.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for bringing up that issue. I will admit it's not one that I have spent much time thinking about. It hasn't crossed my desk, so I will be following up and see what we're doing on that and how we can support, because obviously there are real potential impacts of munitions leaking into our food supply and its food supply and our healthy ocean ecosystems. I think the one thing about the blue economy that I sort of lean to and turn to is the fact that it's so easy to create divisions in the world, to say, okay, this is a plan for Europe, but it doesn't include North America, or this is a plan for North America, it doesn't include South America, or, that's an Asian problem, but we're not thinking about it in Africa. And the one thing that binds us all together as humans is the ocean. I don't care whether you walk down to the shore here, that water you're touching is connected to water off of Perth, Australia, even though it's the furthest possible point from where we are right now. And the idea that if we are going to succeed in this interconnected world as people, as a civilization, as a species, is we're going to have to understand that our individual actions as individuals or even as communities or countries impact everything else and everyone else. We are in a closed system. Except for energy inputs from the sun, everything within this system has an impact on everything else. And the best way to understand that is through caring for our oceans. Everyone can understand the tragedy of the commons when it comes to ocean. The tragedy of the commons is, if something belongs to everyone, well, nobody actually feels responsible for taking care of it, or doing the hard work of stewarding it, because it's everyone's and therefore it's no one's. Well, if we can make that switch to understanding our direct responsibility and opportunity related to caring for healthy oceans, and not fall back to the easiest, lowest common denominator, and not say, well, that country is going to continue illegal fishing, or that country is going to continue polluting, so why should any of us bother? And if we can get past that and show the kind of leadership that I know Canadians and a certain number of other countries are willing to step up and do, then we go a long way towards solving the shared common problems that are in our atmosphere, in our topsoil, in our land use, in our, so many other shared problems we have, because everyone is connected to oceans. And that idea of capturing something that is a hook to start thinking differently, to start understanding what our instincts don't tell us. Like, our instincts as human beings don't tell us, well, be careful, don't do that because it'll affect the entire world. Nobody ever used to think like that. They hadn't learned to think like that. There was never any credibility to the idea that one small action could impact an entire ecosystem or an entire planet. But that's where we are right now. And getting people to think that way is really hard. It's going to require a total shift in mindsets and in thinking. And for my money, getting people to understand that shift in thinking as it relates to oceans, which we all feel so emotionally connected to, I think is one of those powerful levers to not just create a blue economy and save our oceans, but to save our planet and perhaps humanity itself. So just to finish on a very large note, boy, all of a sudden that sounded big, but we all got to do our part.
Certainly sounds better than the alternatives, doesn't it? Listen, thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister Trudeau, and to my illustrious panel for coming along to conclude our day. I hope that you've all enjoyed that opportunity. Thank you for your questions as well, and indeed for all your contributions throughout the day. I must thank all of our speakers from the morning to now, and everyone who's seen it through for day one. And we'll hope to see most of you back tomorrow for day two. I'm always reminded that some of the nicest 5 words that you can ever say from a stage at the end of the day are, "There will be drink shortly." And I think it's about 5:40-ish. The cocktail hour commences. It's reassuringly early here, and I enjoyed that very much. But most of all, thank you for coming. Thanks to our panel and to the Prime Minister for making time at such a really pressured time in his diary. We do appreciate it. Do keep reading us in The Economist on this and everything else, and we will try to take on a lot of the challenges that we're hearing as well today and follow up the story of innovation and opportunity around the world's oceans. But thank you so much indeed for coming. Yes.